late April, Mid-Atlantic grid operator PJM announced it had finally overhauled its interconnection process with a redesigned approach aimed at improving the certainty, speed, and discipline of project review. For those of you who don't follow this at all, lucky you, the process of interconnecting new supply projects to the grid involves getting in line, the queue, with a proposed project to be studied at multiple levels. These studies include the impact of a new project on existing power flows, whether or not new transmission infrastructure will be required, who pays for it, and the potential impact on neighboring systems. Queues have become hopelessly snarled in recent years. For a while, PJM's review process took as long as 5 to 7 years to get to a signed interconnection agreement, and at one point the grid operator simply stopped taking new applicants. Delays were so long that almost 3/4 of the projects in the queue were withdrawn, including many that had achieved interconnection approval status but had become economically unviable due to lengthy timeframes. A large part of that issue arose from the huge number of projects that caught planners by surprise. A decade or more ago, you had a much smaller number of far larger projects. But as smaller wind, solar, and battery storage projects entered the picture, PJM got overwhelmed by the sheer volume of cats and dogs and rats and frogs. There was also a lot of speculation in the mix. Developers might have a finite amount of capital to deploy in the U.S. while dealing with clogged queues, so they might put different projects in various queues across the country. And if one or two got approved, they'd pull the others. They often didn't have to put up much, if any, capital, so they enjoyed a free option in those queues that ended up costing everybody. By the way, the dynamic on the demand side with data centers and large load interconnection queues for hookup to the grid is very similar. As a consequence, you now have huge amounts of phantom load inflating the capacity numbers by as much as an estimated 3 to 10x. Some utilities and grid operators are now requiring hefty deposits if data centers want to stay in the game, but more rigor and higher fees are likely necessary to deter rampant queue speculation from data center developers. Back to the supply side. For those who've been watching PJM, and who doesn't love observing interconnection queues, you may remember that the old approach involved a first-come, first-served model, and also didn't require much by way of proof of financial viability. So the quicker you got in line, the better, even if you weren't really ready to develop a project. But now with its new approach, PJM has a first-ready, first-served approach, according priority to projects that are more advanced and have a better chance of actually being commissioned and flowing power. Projects must also show proof of financial viability prior to entering the queue, and that proof includes meaningful upfront financial commitments and a demonstration that developers actually control the project sites through a lease or ownership. The goal is to dramatically cut the number of speculative projects lined up, increase predictability, and hasten the timelines for interconnection. The deadline for new applications closed on April 27th, and shortly thereafter, PJM announced that it had 220,000 megawatts, so 220 gigawatts, of nameplate capacity in new applications, representing 811 projects. Gas-fired generation led the mix with 106 gigawatts of nameplate capacity and 157 projects, followed by energy storage with 66 gigawatts offered by 349 projects. Perhaps surprisingly, 27 nuclear projects were in the mix with an associated 18 gigawatts of capacity, followed by 15 gigawatts of solar and 9 gigawatts of solar storage hybrids, together totaling 187 projects. There were also 65 wind projects in the list responsible for 4.7 gigawatts of capacity and some other smaller, different types of projects as well. PJM must now commence validating the applications to determine whether the necessary technical and financial information has been provided. Last year, the grid operator announced it had teamed up with Google's Tapestry to aid in the interconnection process. In its recent announcement, PJM says it will deploy Tapestry's HyperQ AI-enabled software to improve efficiencies by reviewing huge reams of data associated with the interconnection process and expedite the studies. To be clear, not all these projects in the queue, even if they are approved, will come online anytime soon for multiple reasons. To take one example, Commonwealth Fusion's in that queue for a project in Virginia, and it doesn't even have a working demo fusion reactor yet. And the gas turbines? Well, GE Vernova's largely sold out through 2030 per its recent earnings report, and Siemens and Mitsubishi enjoy similar positions. So if developers don't have turbines, they'll have to get in line. PJM also notes that state permitting processes will slow things down. The grid operator's goal is not to be the critical bottleneck to getting that much-needed supply online, and it cites an expected increased demand of 30 gigawatts between 2024 and 2030, driven largely by data center loads. Thus, they intend to review projects in this first new interconnection cycle in what's designed to be a 1 to 2 year process, depending on the impact of an individual project. Meanwhile, looking further to the northeast, we see an entirely different case, showing just how regionally differentiated this power puzzle has become. ISO New England is also eyeing changing demand, but in this case, it's forecasting a reduction from previous numbers. Few, if any, large data centers will locate there, and the ISO New England's large load forecast foresees only a couple hundred megawatts at present. Instead, projected load growth is and was anticipated to have come from EV sales and heat pump deployments. The grid operator has cut its forecast a couple times now in response to the changing facts on the ground. For example, the fact that there are no longer any federal incentives for EVs. In 2024, ISO New England forecasted about 17% load growth over the coming decade, then ratcheted that back a year later to 11%. And with its just released Capacity, Energy, Loads, and Transmission (CELT) report, it's dialed the number back yet again to 9% through 2035. In a recent blog, the grid operator commented that the region's net annual energy use has actually trended downward over the past 2 decades, a result of more efficient heating and cooling systems, appliances, and lighting, as well as the growth of on-site solar power. That dynamic's now shifting as a result of state policy goals for carbon emissions reductions that will drive electrification technologies. However, that transition is occurring more slowly than was anticipated a couple of years ago. This stuff is hard to get right in a world in which everything is constantly in flux. Let's take the Iran conflict as an example. If the Straits of Hormuz stay blocked for another 2 months or so, and the concerns of some forecasters about an enormous economic petroleum energy shock come true, EV sales could boom again. They're already inching up. And anybody on oil heat in New England will be racing for the economic refuge of heat pumps. In fact, a close relative of mine just got a bill for $526 for only 100 gallons of oil. In this world, it seems we and grid planners can count on little else besides the accelerating pace of change. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.